everyone, welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. I'm your host, Arif, and as always, I'm joined by...
Myself, TK, the unusual co-host, but always here.
Thanks, TK, and thank you once again to all our listeners for joining us for another episode this week. What are we talking about? Well, for those of you who subscribe to our newsletter, you may have observed that this week we visited the Workhuman Live conference here in London. Fascinating insights and a lot of things that provoke some thinking for us. And that's why it's inspired me to talk about some of that in today's episode, specifically around workplace motivation. As we all know, I suppose, that for many organizations and employees, especially post-pandemic, working in hybrid environments, this challenge of workplace motivation only is increasing. And regular listeners who've probably listened to our Gen Z episode, we've talked a lot about the differences younger people, perhaps, of that generation see the world of work and see their relationship with working life much different to many of us. These feelings of motivation, belonging, have only increased in different ways.
Or decreased.
Yeah, or decreased, exactly. So with all that in mind, I think I'd like to explore what does this all mean from the perspective of recognizing employees, perhaps more specifically. How does employee recognition have an impact on these feelings of motivation, maybe even attrition rates in organizations as well? So, yeah, TK, where should we start with this conversation? I've got plenty of thoughts, of course, but I know I've picked out employee recognition specifically. I think there's a lot to talk about there. It's been inspired, as I said, by visiting that conference this week. But yeah, any thoughts to kick off the episode from you?
Well, it's been quite inspirational. I think, what I've seen is recognition not necessarily being properly utilized for many of, people I worked with. And I think, trying to get something to help people really feel like they belong and they can find some motivation at work is always a good idea. So yeah, we haven't really explored recognition.
No, and I think obviously when we mention this topic, your listeners might be thinking about, well, managers and recognizing their employees for doing great work is, it's a no-brainer. They should be doing that. I'm sure we'd agree. But I think there's another dimension to it, which we've, as you said, not explored. And maybe we'll explore both, which is peer-to-peer recognition. Now, I don't want to go into that just for the moment. We'll come back to that. But I think just setting the scene in terms of, employees and their feelings of connectedness to an organization, their feelings of motivation, a bit of data might be worth setting the scene and setting that context.
That's a great thing, yeah.
Always a great thing. So, Gallup data apparently shows, and this is the US context, so fair enough, but it's interesting nonetheless. 2 in 10 US employees strongly agree they are connected to their organization's culture. I mean, that's staggering. 2 in 10, that's very low. Leaders are also, as you would argue, TK, we've talked a lot about this in previous episodes, regular listeners familiar with it, with our thoughts on this. Leaders have a key responsibility in keeping employees and teams engaged. And their further research from Gallup highlights that, managers account for 70% of team engagement. So, when you think about that and putting all that together, one might assume that managers are not perhaps performant enough to, recognize their role in employee engagement and are not skilled enough maybe in, creating the right atmosphere for employees to feel connected to the organization and motivated enough to be present. TK, your reaction to that, I suppose?
Well, the data actually says that the employees don't feel connected to the organization's culture. That's
True.
the interesting thing, right?
Yeah.
So, it's, and yeah, on the face of it, 2 or 20% seems staggeringly low, but practically, did we expect more? Did, what organization has a strong, distinctive, easily identifiable culture that you can feel connected to, right? But again, you're right. This is a wasted opportunity, for people to, I'm not necessarily saying fully enjoy work, but at least find some purpose in it and be motivated.
Yeah. Definitely. It does feel like a waste opportunity. And I think, again, something we may have talked about before, but I think there are elements of not just, as you said, it is the organizational culture. We should note that, but there are elements of, in terms of managers being skilled enough and knowing enough and being maybe even taught, shall we say. And when we're talking about managers here, I'm talking about people managers, right? People, for those of you who are listeners, who are leaders, who are responsible for employees, line reporting, etc. That's who we're talking about. So there is, I think, some conversation there to be had about, how much effort do organizations put in teaching, training, upskilling their managers in, some of these areas, so that they know what they're doing when it comes to, staff retention, attrition, reducing all of that stuff, making it less of a concern, but also obviously creating that environment where employees feel that connection.
It's a good point, and obviously one would say that, from what I've seen, very little.
Yeah.
And that's a huge shame. And it's interesting that these systems are usually in big corporations, company-wide, and in small corporations or small companies, it's all quite organic. So yeah, the middle ground is a bit of a problem.
And just connecting back to where we started the conversation, and I mentioned Gen Z, etc. There is, growing research around workplace loneliness as well. This is another dimension. I haven't brought this in yet to the conversation, but in the UK, 3 in 5 people aged 18 to 34 say they feel lonely often. Now that's pretty sad to read. This comes from a book by a lady named Norina Hertz, The Lonely Century, How to Restore Human Connection in a World That's Pulling Apart. So a book reference for you bibliophiles out there. But yeah, just that alone. I mean, and okay, that we're talking about population from a population point of view, but I'm sure that if we drill down and look at workplaces, the data isn't going to be much different in terms of that age group feeling less connected. It seems not only to the the organizational culture, but maybe to each other in the workplace. And I do wonder, TK, how much the post-pandemic effect has had an impact on that feeling of loneliness in the workplace.
I think absolutely huge. I think, for many people, especially since, as you quoted, this epidemic of loneliness, or dare I say, deterioration of, social connections, has been going on for a while. The workplace, the office was like an oasis of relationships that you could have. People were readily available and there were plenty of opportunities to engage in relationship building activities like work. But since the post-pandemic world of work means that there's less people to, obviously they haven't perished, but they might not congregate in offices as much as they had before, these opportunities may have diminished.
And I think this is the point. And I'm really curious about it, and this is where I started the conversation, hybrid working, and I know we've had a previous episode on it. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but just connecting the two thoughts together around the impact hybrid working has had on this demographic. And there is a challenge here because for employees who are maybe, let's say, parents, for example, we've talked a lot about engaging or increasing diversity in the workplace, and we've talked about female leaders, etc., and conversations we've had around flexible working. so there is no one size fits all, where there are demographics of the working population who require or who do demand hybrid working for various reasons. But then there is this knock-on effect, it seems, where we have a younger population who are feeling less and less disconnected. And some of the conversation I was having with other HR leaders this week was that actually we are seeing that younger population wanting to come into the office more, fascinatingly. So there isn't actually there isn't so much of that desire actually from that young population of, no, we want to be at home or we want to be completely flexible. It is a constant evolving, changing world, isn't it, TK? This is really hard for organizations, HR communities, to really know how do you keep your staff motivated and keep that attrition level down with all this
First of all, I think, maybe we should dig into the reasons why it might be happening. And, possibly like even digging as much as you said about, the current situation when it comes to social groups and connections. If you remember from our youth, or maybe the youth of people even older than us, which we can't remember, obviously, the amount of distractions we had as young people, as in, technology, TV, everything, was obviously less. And thus, people congregated and fostered social relationships outside in the yard, in the park, playing outside and so on. This was just a natural human thing to do. And thus they received a proper amount of basic human training on how to form relationships and everything that goes on with that. Plus, obviously, they also formed long-term relationships, especially since people were less mobile back in the day, right? They usually stayed put. The relationships with your local community were stronger. This is what we as humans have evolved to experience throughout our youth and adult lives. But as the world is changing, introducing many other wonderful consumers of our attention, the playground seems to be less attractive to people, and people have much more to put their attention in, which isn't necessarily directed towards social relationships. And thus, I believe, in my personal opinion, that they might not develop the skills. Having said that, the basic human need is still there. So what we end up with is, the situation where we haven't fostered these relationships. We haven't developed the skills to foster these relationships. In fact, we have developed shyness and resentment of forming these wonderful relationships. So we're looking for surrogates. We're looking for schools and the adult schools, which are the office buildings, to do it for us. Shame on us. I think, there's a systemic problem that we're trying to put a stopgap in. And now that we've removed the Band-Aid, which is the modern school, aka the office for adult people, there's a problem. Well, actually, the problem's somewhere else. And, let's tackle that first. Let's understand where the problem comes from before saying, well, we need to bring people back to the office so there's more of a Band-Aid. That's personal rant, but here you go. It's a podcast.
Exactly. We've got time for that. So let's move the conversation on a little bit then, I think. And the start of this episode, I mentioned employee recognition, and so let's tie that in then, because what is fascinating to me and what I was discovering quite a bit this week is around how the power of an employee recognition program in increasing that connectedness and increasing that feeling of being part of an organizational culture, right? So what do we mean by employee recognition? So what we're talking about here are programs which are peer-to-peer. So we're not talking about necessarily managers recognizing their employees, which should be happening anyway, and we can talk more about that. But we're talking about peer-to-peer recognition. This is employees recognizing fellow colleagues and co-workers for work that they think has gone above and beyond their own expectations. And we're also talking about here programs that include a financial reward element. So this is a monetary gift, for instance. So TK, we might have a staff member who we think or a colleague you worked with in a project who you think has done an exceptional job. You've really enjoyed working with them. They've gone over and above in delivering something. So you might, go on to this a system or whatever it is. You might send a note to them, say, you know what, John, I think you did a fantastic job. You demonstrated great teamwork. You were really on the ball with the presentations and blah de blah, and I want to recognize you. And here's a gift of £50 for all the work you've been doing. Now, just on that alone, pause there, TK. I don't know. Have you had the experience of any recognition program like that before? Have you been part of that before? Anything like that remotely?
No, not a peer-to-peer program
No.
with monetary, ability to actually give people money, right? I think this is so simple. Why should it be unique and why should it be innovative? But it is.
I mean, and I think it is. You're right. And I think I've not been a part of a program like this. I have been a part of a program where there wasn't a financial element, number one. And secondly, it wasn't peer-to-peer, but it was manager to line report. Both of them, I can see, what's interesting here is with this type of program where it's peer-to-peer, the employee or the co-worker has to go really over above their day job to actually, find that person, write a message, and then put their money where their mouth is essentially, and say, look, I want to gift you some kind of value of X amount because of the work you've done. And so I think that the belief here is that there is some sort of sense of genuineness, and it is some kind of source of truth within an organization. If you want to judge what the culture is like, how employees are feeling, what the level of performance is amongst employees, etc. Because the view is, employees have gone out of their day job. They've probably sat down at night or something, or they've done it when they've got a moment, and they've deliberately chosen to recognize a coworker. I think there's something quite interesting about that, TK. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I guess this should be quite natural. It's just a shame that, we're speaking about it like if it's something that's, out of space and
I know,
completely alien to modern organizations. And, obviously, we've seen the data as we've been to the conference and, how this actually works, obviously. So the more interesting question for me is why is it so strange that it is a very good idea? Why are we talking about it? Why is this a topic of conversation? Why haven't people been doing that before? Right? And what's your hypothesis, Arif?
This is a good question, and I think I don't know what I suspect maybe there are. Obviously, with any change, with any behavioral change, process change, however we want to describe it, there's always resistance, right? And there's always a view of that's not how we've done things before, and there is still. And I was listening to a researcher from Gallup describing how he still comes across, and we're in 2024, right? So just to set the scene, he still comes across. Managers, leaders who believe that work is a separate entity to your home life or your outside life. We're not here to make friends. We're here to get a job done. And so, I don't need employees being measured or surveyed about their friendships at work and all of that. It's not important. And in his view, is trying to say, well, he really doesn't understand how, managers now in 2024 still can't get their heads around the fact that, friendships, connectedness has a huge impact in an employee's feeling of satisfaction in the role. Whether or not it's the manager or not, we have talked about the manager being responsible, 70% of their managers accounting for 70% of team engagement. We've mentioned that statistic. But just aside from that, it's that general employee-to-employee connection as well. So I'm not saying there's a hypothesis there, but there is anecdotal evidence that suggests, unfortunately, we still have managers who are perpetuating. Is that the word, right? Perpetuating, sorry. Perpetuating views that one would think have been long consigned to the dustbin, TK. There you go.
Well, I'm not surprised. If someone as a manager thinks that needs to dehumanize themselves to be a boss, whatever you want to call it, they might find it difficult to think that others are fully human at work. But I have a different hypothesis, as in why these systems aren't as popular. Because again, and it's a leadership show we're running here,
Yeah.
and I believe that leaders can achieve greatness and be amazing, but there are many leaders that have a lot of work to do, and many of these leaders believe that it's their sole responsibility and prerogative to judge other employees, give them praise and negative feedback. How would you usurp this, God-given right that managers have and give it to other employees? That's sacrosanct.
Excuse me. Yeah, and I think, as you said, we're talking about leaders here. I was listening to a panel guest this week, and he was arguing provocatively, I think, HR only works because they need bad managers, and bad managers need HR. And the audience erupted in groans of laughter and shock at the same time. But there is some grain of truth perhaps in that, which is that the bad management is somehow excused because they're producing results, so they're getting the job done. So yeah, the behavior we can put that aside. It's not that important right now. I'm sorry that you've had a bad experience with that person, but they are performing in terms of business outcomes. So, it's not important.
Oh, that's something I've heard time and time again. And, it's a strong argument. It's very difficult to debate, right? You could say, well, if they were a better person/manager, the results could be even better. Just because that the results are there, does that mean that this is the optimal person and optimal behavior in the situation? Who knows? People say that this particular pattern of behavior or these whatever values that the person is demonstrating aren't helpful, and I can only imagine that if these behaviors would be different, things could be better. I mean, isn't it as logical as the previous statement?
Well, there you go. So I think on that note, let's take a break and then we'll come back and maybe talk a bit more about some research on employee recognition. So see you in a few moments. Are you looking to expand your leadership knowledge? Well, join us for a live LinkedIn webinar on Tuesday, 18th June at 5 p.m. Together with our friends from Project 23, a leading UK DEI consultancy, we'll be hosting a panel discussion exploring how leaders must embrace their fears in order to stay relevant in today's workplace. Simply visit our website and scroll to the bottom of our homepage to register. And if you're listening to this episode after the event, you can catch all of our webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. And as I was saying before the break, let's look at some of the research on employee recognition. I think there's some fascinating stuff. Just connecting back to the conversation we've been having. One of the things that I was discovering was that employees who are recently and frequently recognized, and we're talking about by their peers here, are the least stressed. So there you go. And in fact, even if they're recognized within the last month, they also report less stress. So frequent and regular recognition can have a impact on well-being. And well-being is something else that we're not really talking about here, but there is an element of well-being here, not just around organizational culture, connectedness and belonging, and all the stuff that we started today's conversation with. Another interesting insight is that of employees who strongly agree that recognition is important in their business culture, wherever they're working, 7 out of 10 of those employees strongly agree that they feel connected to their organization's culture. So there is a body of evidence suggesting that, being recognized or giving recognition to others in a peer-to-peer format or program does have a direct impact in one's connectedness to an organization and its culture. It may be that there is some feeling of authenticness, authenticity, if I can say it like that, which is that, I do feel that I belong here. I do feel like the culture of this organization is one that aligns with my value system, is one that I feel comfortable with. I get value from it. I get inspiration from it because I'm recognized for the work I'm doing. That's an interesting connection there.
And it's interesting, as we've seen this data being shared, going back to one of our early episodes about burnout and the stress-inducing feeling that you don't know if you're doing the right thing or you don't know the full extent of your responsibilities. Getting recognition is a physical demonstration that you're doing the right thing. You're being accepted. Your work is being valued. You're a great person.
Exactly. And I think that's a really crucial point for employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I think, there is some other interesting stuff here around the level of connection. One piece of work identified that in a particular banking sector organization, those employees who were recognized, who felt that they share strong connections with their colleagues, 63% felt that they were not recognized enough. 65% felt they only recognized because they were thanked on a very generic way. But once a monetary recognition was applied, that jumped to 76% in terms of the level. These are the percentages in terms of how connected they feel to the organization. So 76% of employees in that banking organization felt connected to the organization after receiving some monetary recognition. That's fascinating. I didn't realize how much of an impact monetary recognition has on how employees feel recognized. And
on connectiveness, which obviously impacts retention.
Exactly.
And probably, also impacts performance. It's an interesting one, right? But I guess it's the personal nature of this recognition came from Mr. X and Madam Y.
Exactly.
Builds connection, doesn't it?
It does. And I think, I excuse me, you would, I think, really feel connected even more to those individuals who recognize you more so than maybe the organization itself. But there's a side effect of that recognition, feeling of connectedness to the wider organization. But the primary maybe goes to the fellow co-workers who recognize you. Let's move the conversation on in terms of how to create this culture. How do you create this culture of recognition? How do you ensure that you can encourage a greater organizational culture through building something like this? A couple of things. Gallup has been doing research on this. We've mentioned them a few times. They seem to be the key ones in this area of work. But there are 5 kind of key pillars that they've identified, that are essential. So I thought maybe we can just go through them briefly, maybe to discuss them, share our thoughts. One of them is around fulfilling expectations. So the type of recognition that is offered, it needs to fill employees' expectations. People want, I suppose, to feel like that what they're recognized for and how much they're given matches the contribution they made to the business. I think that's fairly straightforward, isn't it, TK? I don't know what.
But that's very straightforward, very reasonable. Obviously,
it's funny
it's
because
interesting. Yeah, how do you know your own expectations, right? If you haven't appreciated before, right?
A couple of funny stories on that one. So in the US, apparently, this is not so long ago. Apparently, I think it was this year, from what I understood. A hospital somewhere in New York State decided to recognize their nurses for their amazing contributions. This is very bizarre, but it is true. Their recognition was not monetary. Okay, you might say, fine, maybe they went for something else. What the hospital directors and management decided instead was to offer their nurses a potato. Now, you can laugh. I laughed. The audience laughed at this story. I was shocked, but then they showed us some news stories to back it up. This is genuine stuff. The hospital offered everyone some potatoes. They laid on some food event with potatoes. To then make matters worse, apparently these potatoes were then taxed. So not only did the poor nurses get offered potatoes as recognition, they were then taxed out of their own salaries for then consuming these potatoes afterwards.
I wasn't there for the story, so I was waiting if you were making a point if it's a very surprising positive recognition through an innovative matter or a terrible joke.
Exactly.
It seems it's the latter.
Yeah, it's this. I was absolutely in shock. So there you go. So please, if you are considering a recognition program and if you are considering, putting something like this together, it has to match, surely, the work that the employees have been doing, and needs to match their expectations. I mean, there was another story about a stone as well. Another company decided to create a recognition program where everyone was given a stone, would you believe? And they were encouraged that use this stone to write a lovely message, design it, color it in, hand it to your fellow coworker. You can imagine how that went down.
I'm trying to imagine the minds of people coming up with this idea.
God knows, TK. I don't know if it's worth delving into that. But the clear message, as I said, relevant. Make it relevant and make it make sense as well, please. The second pillar when it comes to putting together a recognition program is around being authentic. So making sure the recognition is authentic, encouraging staff to write authentic recognition. Now, the last thing you want...
Potatoes and stones were quite authentic, I would say.
Exactly. But, if you were to receive a message of thanks and recognition from a colleague, I think the last thing you'd want is it to feel... what's the word, I suppose? Generic and, and not personalized, or it doesn't feel like... or I suppose maybe they didn't put any effort into putting it together, as a copy and paste from something or something like that. I think you would feel quite disappointed, wouldn't you, TK? I would.
Maybe, remembering the times when I was working as an employee, maybe I just got used to being disappointed. So
low expectations.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's quite a story maybe for another time. I mentioned personalized, but yes, that's important too. So, don't write generic messages of recognition. Do make it personalized. And apparently what some of the research around this is also suggesting is that when it comes to personalize, be very specific about what it is that you liked about that person's work. Because what that does is it creates a reinforcing loop of behavior. We've mentioned this in a previous episode as well. If you've seen something good, call that good out, be specific about what that was, why you liked it, because that person then receiving that feedback or that recognition will be like, oh, wow, okay, I maybe didn't pick up on the fact that the way I did that was very impactful and created good energy and vibes for the other person. Maybe.
I think this one is absolutely key because it also shows that you are paying attention. Now, this really goes
Yes.
also to the authenticity because, well, okay, so I've seen this, I'm acknowledging this, and I really like this. And it means like, okay, ooh, you took note.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. You feel that you've been recognized, genuinely recognized, right? Not just for the sake of it. And I think, again, this goes back to what I was talking about earlier in the episode, which is, you know, a good recognition does mean it's authentic in the sense that it's trusted. You can use it as a source of truth or a barometer to look at where an organization is in terms of their culture, etc. Which goes to the next one around being equitable, being fair in the way you give your recognition. Don't play politics. It doesn't work. It's not helpful for anyone. Do it for the sake of doing it because it's the right thing to do, and be fair about it. And, if you are applying a monetary reward, I think some of the programs I've seen, what they seem to be doing is they seem to give each employee a bucket of value, and they're able to then distribute over the course of a time period to whoever they feel they can. Yeah. So avoiding this kind of biased type approach, perhaps. And yeah, the last thing is it needs to be embedded into the organizational culture. So keep reinforcing. This is the critical thing. You've got to keep reinforcing the messages about the recognition system that you want to use. Encouraging it, teaching people how to use it, calling good stuff out, making people aware, educating people. The more it's used, the more the organization is going to get benefit from it. And what's interesting is, TK, that when you start building a map, what you start to see is bubbles appearing of groups of employees recognizing each other because maybe they've worked on a program of work or they worked in the same functional area.
Yeah, we do work in teams, absolutely.
Exactly. But it goes beyond the core group of people. And so what you get a picture of is the real organizational structure, real organizational design, because the hierarchy on paper might be one thing, but actually how people are working together and collaborating is something entirely different. And what you see is patterns of employee to employee recognition create a visual picture of actually who's working with who and what's happening in the organization, what's going on, where are the more productive areas perhaps, who's being really high performing. There is also some data apparently around high performance here, which is those employees who get recognized more often. I think there is a factor of number of times recognized within a year, are then considered or more likely to get promoted into higher positions, and are also apparently more likely to be high performing anyway. So there you go.
Makes sense, right? So, if you do deeds that deserve recognition, you're probably a decent performer.
Exactly. There we go. Well, I mean, those are some interesting thoughts. We haven't touched on the manager aspect much in terms of managers recognizing employees, but I think there isn't much too different here. I mean, manager initiated recognition, I think importantly there is, being very quick, I think is very important there. As soon as something's happened as a manager, you should want to recognize the employee as quickly as possible. Don't delay. Also, keep it sincere, like we've already discussed. And also, it just praise constantly. Being in the mindset where you are ready to offer that praise when you see something good is always good for morale and motivation. It's never a bad thing. I don't know what you think, TK. Is there anything you want to add on?
Well, it's important to be able to. Yeah, so there are managers and there are people actually that are critical by nature. And I think for them, it's possibly difficult to give out praise because, there's always something that could be done better. And I think it's just important, even if you have this mindset, to also be authentic in it and say, okay, well, be matter of factual, right? Because you did that, that's the effect. And, I think, I really think you went above and beyond doing that, and I would really like you to know. And also, as with this particular study, it should be followed by something that mattered. If it can be a monetary reward, it should be.
Yeah, good point. On that point, I think maybe we wind our episode up today. Do you have any closing thoughts or feelings you want to share about what we've been discussing, TK? Any more things to add?
Well, maybe one thought, which is like we've talked so much about recognition arriving from peers, but we haven't said anything about the opposite. What if you don't like someone's behavior? What's the effect of giving someone a negative recognition? How would that look like? Would they be deducting something from someone's salary? Because after all, the world is a balanced place, and does that have a place, or are we just being positive? Now, obviously, that's not the question that I'm willing to open up for the end of the podcast, but
that's quite a bombshell to end on, TK. Thanks for that. Not maybe what our listeners are expecting, but perhaps we come back to it. Who knows, in a future episode. But yeah, a provocative thought nonetheless.
There you go.
Either way, you shouldn't expect anything less from us. Should our listeners, TK? They shouldn't by now. Either way, thank you very much to all our listeners for tuning in, for listening to this episode. We hope you found it useful, give you some food for thought. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our show. Please give it a like or give it a review. All of that helps with the algorithm. And until next time, we'll see you around. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye-bye.